Let's talk about some facial bones and facial bone features. Starting over here with your cheekbone, this here is the zygomatic bone. This extension here, which is processing towards the temporal bone, this extension is called the temporal process. This is the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. This is the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. Collectively, these make up your entire cheekbone, and this is all called the zygomatic arch. The zygomatic arch includes the temporal process of the zygomatic bone and the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. This bone right here happens to be the greater wing of the sphenoid bone, and we'll look at that in a lot more detail shortly. All right, looking here within the orbit, we can also see a little bit of the ethmoid bone. Again, we'll take a look at that from a lot of different angles. This is the lacrimal bone, and we can see that the lacrimal bone has a little canal through it called the lacrimal fossa, and that is essentially where your tears drain down into your nasal cavity. Okay. What we can also see making up part of the orbit is this bone right here, so your upper jaw bone. Right, ultimately fuses together here, but this upper jaw bone is called the maxilla, sometimes called the maxillae for plural. The bridge of your nose is made up of two different bones, each called a nasal bone. So these are paired bones. All right, if we look inside the nasal cavity, we can see a couple different things going on. First of all, these little bumps protruding out medially from the lateral wall of the nasal cavity, these are called the inferior nasal conchae. These other little bumps up here are part of the ethmoid bone. So this is part of the ethmoid bone, and this over here, all part of the ethmoid bone. This that I'm pointing to right now is the middle nasal concha, and this is also a middle nasal concha. This structure right here makes up what is called the nasal septum, or the wall dividing the right and the left halves of the nasal cavity. The superior portion is made up of the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone, whereas the inferior portion of the nasal septum is made up of its own bone called the vomer. Moving down to other jaw features here. We talked before about the supraorbital foramen. This is the infraorbital foramen.